Well, it was about 2 decades ago in South Carolina. Lizard man sightings drew worldwide attention, including reports on the CBS Evening News. Lizard man, he might be back. John Rhodes is next on Coast to Coast AM. John Rhodes, also known as the Cryptohunter, is America's most outspoken and controversial UFO researcher. He's known around the world for his pioneering work researching reports of reptilian humanoid contacts and his out-of-the-box perspective regarding UFOs, alien encounters, the hollow earth, secret government technologies, and the subsurface facilities. He's been a featured speaker at national and international UFO conferences. I've seen him at a few, and he's our guest tonight on Coast to Coast, John Rhodes. Hey, John, how are you?
I'm doing fine, George. How are you doing?
Good. I'm glad you're on the program tonight. This is an incredible story of this lizard man.
Yeah, the lizard man's back. At least so the signs foretell. It looks like something's happening over there in Bishopville, once again tying into the 1988 reports that streamed out of that sleepy little South Carolina community that catapulted the plot on the map all the way to the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather at one point.
How long was the lizard man story alive out there?
Well, it was alive for about 3 or 4 years. At first, when it hit, of course, it received not only national attention, but it received press attention from all around the world. And because of the multiple eyewitness reports, as well as people of high standing in the community having seen something that resembled half man, half dinosaur, sometimes maybe wearing some sort of a pelt or a fur, giving the appearance of a large Bigfoot-like creature, these reports stimulated the press as well as the imaginations of all kinds of people that ended up in the area, and the area was inundated from anywhere from documentary filmmakers, cryptozoologists, all the way to, of course, packs of hounds and men carrying shotguns into the swamp.
Was anybody ever hurt, John, from this creature?
No, nobody's actually ever been hurt, interestingly enough. It seems to have an aversion towards vehicles. And from my point of view, if you were a wild animal and perhaps had a couple close encounters with a car on a dark road at night, and 2 or 3 of the reports actually that did come in say that they almost hit this creature, that perhaps it wouldn't recognize the driver in the vehicle as being as controlling the vehicle or the large object coming at it, but it really kind of has taken its aggression out on the vehicles themselves, even from the very first account with young Christopher Davis.
John, let's describe, first of all, specifically what Lizard Man might look like.
Well, as many of your listeners know, over the years I've been studying and reporting on the appearances of these half-human, half-reptilian beings that seem to have emerged from the shadows.
Mm-hmm.
After everybody was getting used to seeing the small, diminutive grays and reporting about them en masse in the UFO communities. And slowly it started to appear as if these beings were actually the controllers of even the grays. The lizard men, or the reptoids as I call them because it's a combinative word of reptilian and humanoid beings, also known to the Hopi as the snake people. Some people refer to them as Shetki or other names like that. These beings are large, anywhere from 7 to 8 feet in height, very broad-shouldered, almost looking like a linebacker, but very, very lean. Eyes that are more of slits that run around the back sides of their heads a little bit, pupils that are vertical slits, scales all over their body, except
weird.
Excuse me?
Weird.
Yeah, it is very strange, and we'll get to it just briefly, but the appearances of these beings resemble historically what people have reported even back in the Garden of Eden about the serpent that spoke to Adam and Eve. Most people don't realize that the older Judaic text in which the Genesis accounts were derived from actually spoke of the serpent in the Garden of Eden as having legs and hands of a man, and that it could walk upright and speak openly to Adam and Eve. But, of course, through the many hundreds of years that have since passed and the revisions to the ancient text, these references to it having snakes and these references to it having hands and feet like that of a man were taken out of the Bible, and the symbol was revised down to a very basic symbol of a snake, of which it became, of course, very symbolic instead of actually depicting a living being. But these beings are, they have large hands, they have long limbs, 3 fingers with an opposable thumb, claws. Sometimes the ones that appear to be more militaristic look like these claws are extremely sharp, like razor sharp, like they reach out and with a flick of a finger cut you open. They have lipless mouths, 2 small slits for a nose, high cheekbones, no visible ears, and they have, well, most of the time when they appear, they seem to have appeared with some sort of a Romanesque-like armor almost, or a futuristic Romanesque armor apparel on, or simply nothing more than just a utility belt with some objects or buttons attached to it.
Well, that tells me there must be some intelligence behind this creature.
It certainly looks like there is, and just like there are mammals out there that are very wild that we are related to, like chimpanzees or bonobos, so are there, and we have intelligent humans that fly to the moon and beyond, so are there other reptilian humanoid beings that have evolved parallel to mankind that look like some of them may be more advanced than others. Some may be very primitive, such as those living in the swamp areas of Bishopville, whereas others may be actually moving back and forth to the surface of the earth from underground, deep underground in earth, cavern systems and sub-cities.
In about 15 minutes, John, we're going to talk with the former sheriff, by the way.
Right.
Who was out that way. When these reports came into South Carolina 20 years ago, were they individual reports? And by that I mean, did witnesses report seeing one lizard man, or did they see numerous lizard men together?
Actually, most of the time they've only seen one moving by itself. There was an individual that I spoke to out in Bishopville that said that in the old days, when he was a child, he used to hear his parents talk about seeing groups of them actually during rainstorms moving across roads from one field to another. But when they were crossing the roads, they were very wary of being seen or being, possibly hit by something. So it does look like there may be family groups out there, but the majority of the times we may be actually encountering perhaps a parent or an elder that has extended itself beyond the normal parameters of their living environment and scouting out to see if they can go for kills of food and whatnot.
What percent do you believe of the people who witnessed seeing lizard men actually saw something? What percent do you think that was? Do you think it was 100%, 80?
Oh, no. No, we're always going to get, just like we do with the reptilian humanoid reports, people whose imaginations have been whipped up by the media,
right,
by reading certain books and stuff like that. And also this whole thing about a person's imagination in the dream state, did they really see something or didn't they? I would have to say, as far as hard physical evidence that something really shook this person and that there's no fictionalizing occurring, would place it probably about anywhere from 7 to 5% of all the reports that come in.
7 to 5, all right.
That's... Yeah, but like Richard Hoagland says, it only takes one right crow to prove that not all crows are black.
Well, that's true. Only takes one real crop formation that is unusually made and that, opens up the whole field.
That's absolutely correct. And these beings, by the way, we may be looking at something that is not only existing on a physical plane here, but something that may be actually moving back and forth through a nearby dimensional state or vibrational state, someplace perhaps that we would determine that we go after death even, another dimension. And this is being actually a theory that's being proposed that's actually looking like it has more and more credibility all the time.
Well, I got to tell you, it's a bizarre story. Now, in your opinion, if Lizard Man exists, and we're going to get into some other descriptions here, but if he exists, does he come from within the planet? Maybe a cavern? Is he an extraterrestrial? Is he a dimensional creature? Does he live on top of the planet? Maybe he's an animal? What do you think?
I think it's pretty much all of the above. I believe that if they live on the surface of the planet, they're actually living in caves near the surface of the planet in remote regions. living deep inside the planet in sub-cities in which they harbor their own living civilizations of small populations compared to that of us on the surface. We may have some who long ago had left Earth, and rumor is they may be coming back en masse soon to make an appearance again. And that, of course, gets us around to 2012, 2013. And then, of course, we get to the dimensional aspect of them. I always get perplexed by, and I'll tell you a story real quick. I had a girlfriend once that really did not care for me talking about the subject matter around her friends because it was so fringe and odd, as you can imagine, especially with people.
That's why you say you had a girlfriend once.
Yeah, one of them. Right, one of the many. And she didn't like me telling people about my studies, and she had a friend whose boyfriend had a daughter that was 16 that got killed in a car accident, and it was very tragic. And when I first met him, he was still visibly upset by the whole event, didn't want to talk about it. About 6 months later, we hooked up with them again, and he looked much better, and he felt much better. And then they said, well, why don't you tell John and Anonymous what it was that happened. And I said, well, what happened? And they go, well, I was pruning the roses in the garden of the chapel where I work. He was a gardener, groundskeeper. Mm-hmm. And he says, it was almost like I was someplace else, and I was sitting on a fountain. And he says, and beside me was my daughter. And he started to cry. I mean, his eyes were welling.
Oh, sure.
And he says that she was sitting on the fountain. She says, Father, I'm not supposed to be here with you now. She says, but I don't want you to mourn for me anymore because I'm just fine. And she says, we all link up together. It's just a long chain. And she says, I just am ahead of you. And then he started looking kind of puzzled, and I said, well, what is it? And he goes, well, one of the things I just couldn't understand, he says, is why when I looked in her eyes, she had vertical slit pupils.
My.
And of course, my girlfriend started kicking me under the table like, oh, my God, because it was just before this event that when he was telling us this, I was expressing to her my ideas about when you die, and your reptilian part of your brain shuts down your autonomic functions in your body, such as respiration, heartbeat, and everything.
Right.
The last part of your brain to actually be functioning is the reptilian part of your brain. And the Buddhists believe, and the Tibetans, that your last thoughts are going to be carried forth with you into the afterlife. So could it possibly be that since all land mammals, including humans, evolved from earlier life forms all the way back to the reptiles, could that ancient part of our brain be so symbolically strong and such a strong archetype in our subconscious that we all feel in some way a great deal of relation and association with the snake?
That's a great story. Truly a great story. Okay, so let's jump ahead just a little bit before we bring in the sheriff here for the next half with you, John. We've got cases now in South Carolina that lizard man, 20 years later, may be back. What's happening?
Well, we're actually looking at a situation in which a couple actually reported to a television station that it looked like their car had been vandalized, but the way that it was vandalized was so strange because it looked like puncture marks or teeth marks in the metal grill of their bumper, as well as on the hood, and parts of the hood had been shredded. Now, it takes a great deal of force to do something like this, but apparently it happened in the middle of the night when they were sleeping upstairs and they never heard a sound. Now, the reason that this is connected with the lizard man situation is because back in 1988, a couple by the name of Tom and Mary Way also had a similar incident in which their Ford LTD had been vandalized at night, and it looked like something was actually trying to catch some animals, or maybe a predator was going after some small prey, and the prey crawled up into the car for shelter to get away from it, and it actually reached underneath through the wheel wells into the engine compartment and started pulling wires out, and it pulled part of the wheel well trim away. Now, when Liston Truesdale got there, he and a couple deputies actually tried pulling on the trim of that wheel well, and they could not strip it off. So it took a great deal of power to do this. In this case, we're looking at a couple that actually had kittens outside. I think they said that there were quite a number of them, but the kittens were missing the next day. The sheriff out there, E.J. Melvin, did actually extract some blood samples, which are being sent to the lab as we speak, to see if they belong to a cat, a human being, or something else. And I'm eagerly awaiting the test results of that, and so is, of course, former Sheriff Liston Truesdale, my good friend.
What if it's the something else, John?
Well, that's what we all look forward to, isn't it, George?
Yeah, that's what we live for.
That's what we live for, some sort of tangible proof. Now, of course, we'll always hear the excuses that without a dead body, we can't prove a thing. So perhaps the genetic information that we might be able to retrieve will show up something anomalous that can't be explained.
Who have been some of the best eyewitnesses to these cases?
I would say one of the best eyewitnesses, and by the way, if you go to my site at www.reptoids.com, I have 3 new pages put together specifically for the coast-to-coast listeners that they can click on, and it'll give them highly detailed images and information regarding what we're talking about tonight, including the photographs of the vehicle that Liston Truesdale took the other night, and those back of the vehicle in the 1988. And I also have other information on there they're going to want to look at. It has a lot of visual impact to be able to see these images at the same time as hear the information. But one of the images I have on there is a drawing. The drawing was made by a colonel in the Army Corps of Engineers who was driving with his wife from a wedding rehearsal one night. And of course, this is a Baptist area, so there's no alcohol allowed, so we don't have to worry about people who have been just drinking and saying things. They were driving home, and his wife was sleeping next to him. Along Skateboard Swamp, where this creature has been repeatedly seen, he looked to his left and saw what he described as a half-man, half-dinosaur running alongside his car, a little bit to the front of it, and then suddenly darting off in towards the woods. Now, he said that he drew the picture, and the picture's up on the website. This doesn't look like a Bigfoot. He's specifically saying a lizard man. And his wife happened to just wake up as it was disappearing off into the woods. The interesting thing about this is that even though he was willing to talk to the sheriff and draw the picture, when the sheriff asked if he wanted to give a written statement, he said, "Let me seek counsel first." And what happened is his attorney said, "Well, you're going to lose all your privacy." And I'm sure in addition to that, since he had a promotion to general that was coming up, he may have been informed, I'm not sure, but he may have, and this logic dictates, that he may have been informed that this would affect his career in the military. Now, since he spent so many years in the Pentagon and was such a high-value witness, you would think, it was a great loss to never have him make a formal statement. Too bad, because many years he had this idea that he wouldn't talk, and when he finally talked, he had it set up for an interview with a television reporter, and just before the television interview took place, he collapsed and died of a heart attack.
Oh, my gosh. How do these things happen, John Rhodes? I
have some suspicion, but no proof. It's very Keel-like. It's very John Keel-like. I mean, it seems that the phenomenon wants to stay just outside our reach, and if it looks like somebody with too high of a credibility comes forward to say, this is something that I saw and we need to look into it, it would stimulate the scientific community into perhaps looking, or at least it would kind of throw it into everybody's face that the subject altogether is being ignored. I would like to point out one thing that's important. When Dan Rather sent Peter Van Sant down there from CBS News to do the report on the lizard man sightings, I've shown this clip before at UFO conferences under Title 17, for educational purposes. Peter Van Sant, when he's ending his report, he's saying, is it that people are really seeing something down here and there's really some sort of a strange creature around here that people are having eyewitness sightings of, or are people just making up stories so it would be good for business? As he's saying this, the first part, when he's saying, are people seeing something down here that's real, he is cueing the audience to a reaction by taking his head and moving it left and right, as in saying no. And when he says, are they just making things up, he starts nodding up and down. So even though the professional attitudes of reporters are that you're not supposed to steer an audience, you're not supposed to give them subliminal cues of how they're to interpret the story, he certainly was disobeying all sense of credibility when it came to his professionalism, and he was steering an audience to react in a certain way to what he was reporting.
Absolutely.
The question is why?
John, stay with us. We'll be back. John Rhodes on Coast to Coast AM. Well, John Rhodes, our guest, and in a moment, Liston Truesdale will join us. He was the Bishopville sheriff in 1988 when the Lizard Man sightings drew this world attention. So they're next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back with John Rhodes. John, let's chat now about the sheriff, Liston Truesdale. I'll let you introduce him. He was the sheriff in 1988 during the Lizard Man sightings. Tell us a little bit about him, John.
Former Sheriff Liston Truesdale is a very good friend of mine, and he's very outspoken in regards to how he feels about what had occurred back in 1988. And despite the amount of ridicule that seems to come up with this kind of subject matter, he stuck by his guns and supported the eyewitnesses in regards to being able to come forward and providing information to law enforcement. He has been living in this area for a long time. He's well-known and well-versed on the Skateboard Swamp, as well as the history of the Skateboard Swamp. It's got a very long and mysterious history, strange hauntings, strange lights, and weird animals being seen. He's very, very highly trained. Most people get this impression that when you go down to the south that you're going to come across some boss hog wearing a big held hat and big old gut sticking out there, and that's just not the way Liston Truesdale is. His history goes back to FBI formal training in the academy, and during every day he went to work, he wore Italian suits. So this is a man to admire, as well as somebody that is really a pillar in society in Southern Carolina.
Okay,
so,
well, let's bring him in.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's bring on Liston.
Hey, Liston, how are you, Sheriff?
Oh, just fine.
Okay, let's chat, the three of us. You too, John. Chime in anytime you want. Tell us a little bit about your background, first of all, Liston, in law enforcement.
Well, I have 37 years in background in law enforcement and 19 years as sheriff. And I retired in 1993. And I didn't lose an election. I just had I thought it was just time to move on and retire, and I retired in 93. But I've had extensive training in law enforcement, being a graduate of the National FBI Academy, graduate of the Southern Police Institute, and training in, well, I hold a degree in criminal justice.
Well, you've been all over the place then, Liston. You've got some credentials probably as long as your arm, I guess. Huh?
Yeah, I have a degree from the University of South Carolina in criminal justice.
All right, so we've stated the case then, John Rhodes, that Liston knows what he's talking about with law enforcement.
Absolutely, and this means that the procedures that Liston followed in regards to interviewing eyewitnesses, especially multiple eyewitnesses, by separating them and getting their stories independently, this is all invaluable investigation techniques that he was able to bring to the subject matter.
Liston, tell us what kind of reports were coming into Bishopville when you were the sheriff. I mean, what were you just first starting to hear before you even went out to start investigating?
Everything was quiet as far as something unusual was going on. In the 1988, we had a report that something had mauled a car in what we call the Browntown section of Lee County. And we thought it was just a regular call that we would get. And then when the deputies, we set two out at the time, they called back and asked for my assistance. They wanted me to come out there.
They wanted the honcho there.
Yeah. When I went up there, I found that something had really mauled a car that was 85 Ford. And it was under a carport, and nothing, it appeared that some kind of animal was after another. And the reason why we found little small tracks all over the car, it was sandy where in that area, and a dew had fallen. And during that time, it would leave tracks, and those little tracks was all over the car. And they had the chrome part on that model automobile around the front wheels, you might say. It was to the fender. It pulled it out, and
wow,
me and chewed. I mean, chewed all the way through that chrome, and
and you could see the bite marks.
Oh yeah, and you see the bite marks.
No, what could eat through chrome like that?
I'd really love to know.
That's one of the mysteries, isn't it, Liston?
You betcha.
Now, when you said that you saw some little tracks, now, if we're talking about Lizard Man, John Rhodes, aren't we talking about bigger footprint here?
Actually, we are, but the smaller tracks look like they may have been some sort of a small prey that was being chased by a large predator. The predator tracks were not seen. However, the small animal that was the tracks that were there was clearly visible, which kind of goes, it gives both Liston and I the impression that something in both these cases was coming near farmhouses in order to look for an easy kill or chase a piece of prey into that area. And for some reason, maybe, cats, they like to hide up in the wheel wells of cars
right.
near the engine compartments because they're nice and warm. Perhaps something was crawling up in those areas to which this, whatever it was, I hate to say a bear because, a bear, the amount of a bear, no animal I know could puncture a hole and have strong enough jaws to puncture a hole right through chrome.
No,
and especially being able to reach up into a wheel well, into an engine compartment, and pull wires out without leaving tufts of hair behind. That's the interesting thing. We're not finding tufts of hair being left behind, which would be a natural kind of a natural thing to take place when something's in a sharp, jagged area.
All right, so Liston, this car then was, as you say, mauled. It was ripped up pretty extensively.
Yeah, on that model car, on the hood ornament is a little chrome design, and
yeah, that's right.
And it broke, and it snapped it in two like a toothpick, and I tried to break the other part, and there's no way. And this went on all over that car, and on the back it had a radio antenna, and it broke it off.
So what did they write the report up as, if you recall?
Well,
vandalism of a car by what?
We don't know.
So you left it unknown.
Yeah.
Then what happened? Did you start getting other calls from people who saw this thing?
Well, nobody saw anything, and at that time, and while we were there, we got a report. I mean, some people who gathered up there, and they was telling us about a strange creature lurking in that nearby neighborhood. And incidentally, this house where this took place is right on the edge of Skateboard Swamp.
Okay, so while you're at that house looking at that mauled car, you get another report. Somebody sees a creature.
That this had been going on for about 2 weeks.
All right.
For at least 2 weeks, and so we pulled off of that altogether and started looking into this. If you got a strange character like that, a creature like that, lurking in the area, which I don't think the lizard man had any part to do with this, but you don't know. But anyhow, we started working on this large creature that you just couldn't believe what they were telling us.
Yeah, what were they describing here?
Well, this was secondhand talk. So we and started looking for some of the witnesses that saw something.
Sure.
So we were looking for two more people that saw something, and when Chris Davis's daddy brought him in, he was just a 17-year-old kid at the time, and he just started describing what he saw. And during that time, the first thing I thought to myself, I can't believe what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And by that time, the first thing I said, draw it. So he drew it. And then next step, I said, okay, you're going to be, which was recording everything.
Yeah.
I said, you're being recorded now. Everything you say is being recorded. And after that, I said, well, you take a lie to take the test. And he agreed, yeah. And what he described is...
Well, first of all, did he pass that test?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what did he describe?
He described that he'd stopped to fix a flat tire. This was on the other side of Skateboard Swamp from where this is, about a mile on the other side of Skateboard Swamp from where all this took place and with the mauled car.
Yeah.
And he described that he was stopped to fix a flat tire, and as he was winding up, he saw something huge, about what he described as about 7 feet tall, and big red eyes, and was running toward him from across the field. So he threw those tire tools into his car and jumped in the car, and
off he went.
And as he did, he said that the thing jumped on the back of the trunk of his car.
Yeah.
And he sped off, and it was about 6 miles from where that took place to his home. And when he drove up into his house, he jumped out of the car screaming and yelling and leaving the car running and the lights on, and ran in the house. And it took about 2 hours to settle him down. Now, this is what his parents said, and they were very reputable people. And I took it for a while that he was scared that he threw whatever it was off the car, and he killed him. Being a young person like he was, I could see where that would make him afraid.
Oh, sure.
And we got everything that he said. I don't know how many interviews he didn't have from the media, from all over, you might say all over the world. Anyway,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
He stuck to his guns every time. If you're going to tell a lie, sooner or later you go very far. But he stuck to his guns every time that he was interviewed, and most of the time I was present when he was interviewed, and he didn't change his story at all.
Now,
the story never changes, which is one of the telltale signs that something really did actually occur. The reports that you get that the story starts changing over time and getting bigger, and those are the kind of accounts that usually, at least from a researcher standpoint, which includes investigation, and from Liston's standpoint, that's when you start smelling that something's wrong with the story and that there might be some sort of falsification taking place.
Sure. Now, Liston, you were saying that he reported that he may have killed a creature?
No, that's what I assumed, that he thought that he threw it off.
I see.
At some point, it got off the car. Now, where it was got off the car, time it hit the time he started off, I don't know.
Now, this never had any wings, did it? Nobody ever described wings?
No.
Looking for Mothman here, John.
One of the things that Christopher did relate was that he saw a hand reach over to the front of his windshield, and it did have claws and 3 fingers with an opposable thumb, and it seemed to be green in color, and another hand was wrapping around to the door on the side. So he never actually got to see the face of this being, only when it was running across him in the field. Can you imagine being a young boy
driving
late
away
at night like there in the woods, seeing something with red eyes running at full pelt towards you, and then jumping on your car? And he had already got the car going down the street out of fear when this thing leaped onto the vehicle. So that creature had to be running at quite a pace.
Now, listen, how do we know that this wasn't some wacko in a costume?
Well, you really don't know that this didn't happen, but I don't see how it could. But there again, it put me in a very
strange situation.
Strange, I guess you would say, position, because you got to. You don't know if somebody's trying to make you look like Barney on the Andy Griffith Show, or where's
with your one bullet, right?
That's right. Or where something is really out there. That was the next thing I was worried about is I-20 comes right through that area, and I was thinking maybe that was something that escaped off a circus truck. If it did, if it was that big, they're not going to say anything about it.
Now, listen, let me ask you, Liston, when the circus broke in town, in other words, when all the press started showing up and everybody started invading your sleepy little hollow there, wasn't there one individual that was an Air Force sergeant who was caught trying to fake something?
Oh, yeah, and I was getting around to that. We had heard of some old people that saw something, and they nobody ever came up. We had to go to them, and so getting around to what I'm saying is they didn't report it, and you'd ask them why, and they said, well, everybody would think I was fool if I said something like that. Anyhow, when some of this, to keep down something like that, to keep people from coming up and trying to get on television and getting publicity, the next thing I said, put out the word, if you come up and we investigate something like that, you go in there and it's a hoax that you're telling us, you're going to jail. So the Air Force sergeant pulled one and he went to jail.
Now, here it is, somebody working in the military that takes it upon themselves to suddenly dress up and try and look like the lizard man running around. And once that happened, didn't all the newspapers and the press start going, well, maybe there's nothing
that's
really
what it
here?
was, yeah.
Yeah, what he claimed he saw the lizard man running down the road, and he toward him, and he had I think a .357 Magnum pistol, and he shot it, and he concocted all of that up, and he had a pretty good story, but he and this happened about 5 o'clock in the morning. A pretty good while after that happened,
well,
maybe 3 weeks.
Overall, Liston, how many reports do you think you got over that period?
Oh, during the time, you talking about actual sightings?
Yeah, from people. A couple of them or more than that?
Oh, we about 12 people saw something.
12 people. Okay. We're going to be back in a moment. Listen with John Rhodes, our special guest. We'll be back with John as we talk about Lizard Man. We're also going to be talking about some other interesting issues just ahead on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie. John Rhodes with us. John, you mentioned something fascinating, rumors of 2012, as it had to do with the return of some lizard people. What did you mean by that?
Well, I get into this a little bit into your upcoming After Dark magazine newsletter magazine, which I've been interviewed by Lex this month with. But when we look forward in time and towards the event termination point between 2012 and 2013, it's connected very symbolically with that of the snake or the serpent, and the snake or the serpent's very strongly connected also to Mexico because of in antiquity. You look back in their historical timeline, you see where Quetzalcoatl or Kulkulkan, the Mayan Kulkulkan, Viracocha, and all these other great benevolent gods, the ones who did not require human sacrifice, were associated with a snake. And then you recognize the UFO activity happening over Mexico, primarily taking place in July 11th, 1991 during a solar eclipse. And then you look forward to the 2012-2013 termination point, which is in the Chinese calendar, the year of the serpent and the year of the dragon. As in a matter of fact, it's not just they divide them up into the four quadrants of earth, air, wind, and fire. These two happen to be the water elements, which brings us to the age of Aquarius. And when you see what might be happening, the ancient Mayans who did actually disappear en masse from the surface, looks like they may have actually retreated deeper and deeper underground in that part of the world and come into contact with some sort of a reptilian humanoid civilization. And then around 2012, 2013 is supposedly the prophesied return of the ones who gave them the original calendar. They didn't say the world was going to end. They said there would be a new calendar. And in order for a new calendar to be made, perhaps the beings that help them achieve that type of intelligence status to make those remarkable calendars may also make a reappearance.
That's fascinating, John Rhodes. Something's going on, isn't it?
Yeah, something's going on. And it actually kind of... It helps us I think it gives humanity a sense of light at the end of the tunnel, that if change can't be had through some sort of voting on this planet, which we've tried for how many years now to try and make things go the right way, and even though we get given all these promises, regardless of what political parties get in office, they seem to all be working for the same goals, and that's for that draconian corporate, groups out there that seem to run the world. But maybe something has to come along, something much bigger, something much more wonderful, in order to kind of shock us out of where we are now and say, perhaps we have a new vision of things to come.
John Rose, let's also get into some other things that you've been working on, and that has to do with the animal mutilations, too. And then next hour, we'll just open up the phone lines, blanket phone lines for you. What's the latest on these cattle mutilations in Montana?
Absolutely fantastic research I've been doing in regards to what I'm discovering up here in Montana. It certainly does look like we're getting possibly down to opening up some doors of perception here and figuring out why the mutilations may be occurring. When I was talking to Sheriff Tom Kuka, who you know and I've had on your show before, in regards to tracking down, and I work a lot with law enforcement, whether it's out there in South Carolina or here in Montana, they seem to be they seem to be more available than people can possibly imagine for tracking stuff like this down. But when I was talking to him, I was wondering if we can't perhaps locate who's doing it and how they're doing it, which we've been focusing on for a lot of decades now. Perhaps we should look at the motives as to what is actually happening. And what I did is I went out there and got a mapping program that is available to everybody, the Google Earth Mapping Program. And I started making place marks, going back through all the records of all the mutilations that happened in Montana since the mid-1970s, when the big rush happened. And I started plotting them out on the map. Now, this map is actually available if you go to my site at reptoids.com. The bottom left link, there is a link there that will take you to a page that talks about, it has a link in there that actually shows a map in which I've been able to chart out all the animal mutilations as well as UFO sightings in a given area. Now, what the strange thing I started recognizing in plotting this out is that they all seem to be on a line going from the northwest to the southeast. Now, this also happens to be the prevalent direction of wind flow in the state. So I was wondering if there was something about the wind. But then I noticed that there were other concentrations of cattle mutilations happening outside this wind flow current. And when I started looking deeper into it, I started realizing that these concentration areas are also connected to the main areas through water or streams and rivers. And I started thinking to myself, now, exactly what's going on here, because obviously we know that they're charting things out and they're measuring something. And when I started thinking it has to do with water and air, I then started looking at the furthest things upwind that are in the state where the cattle mutilation started happening. And I noticed that in that upper side, which is in the Valier and Depouillier area, where John Peterson had his cow mutilated back in 2006, up on the very northwest side of it, there are pig farming communities. And so I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Let me look further into this and see what might be there.
How many different farms are we talking about, or did that matter?
Well, it doesn't really matter. When I tell you, when we get to the point, it'll make sense to you. There's about maybe 4 or 5 major pig operations up there and cattle feeding operations.
And when you say major, these are huge.
Well, yeah, they can be. Sometimes they're some of them will only have 2,000 or 3,000 pigs. Others will have up to maybe 4,000 or 5,000 pigs. And the thing about this is that I started thinking, well, what's going on here? And I did some further research, and I discovered that in the state of Montana, back in 2003, Judge Hansel up in Helena, Montana, which is where I live, had a case come up before him where some residents around and farmers around a pig farming, a pig feeding operation in central Montana had sued to see if they could get the pig farm to actually either shut down its operations or be more tightly controlled in as far as how it's releasing fecal matter from the pigs. And you know, pigs create a lot of pig fecal matter. A pig will produce 4 times as much fecal matter as a human in a day. And this pig waste, because pigs are so close to humans as far as their physiology and their internal organs and their digestive tract, that when fecal matter is taken from pig farms and spread into irrigation fields, that irrigated water actually can travel off the fields through rain runoff into the water table or be carried high up into the wind and be blown downwind. And the judge up here ordered a statewide environmental review of the effects of cattle feeding operations and pig feeding operations on the environment. For a period of 3 to 4 years, the Department of Environmental Quality disregarded the judge's order. And they got together with the Livestock Association and forced through legislation laws that actually nullified and vacated the judge's order. I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. What is going on here that perhaps they would want to protect? I understand that it can be expensive to do testings of these operations.
Sure, of course.
But when it comes down to things, I don't understand why it would be such a problem. Then the journey got even more mysterious because I started doing more research and finding out that the EPA produced a report. It was a comprehensive 185-page report that you can download from my site that details how fecal matter from pig feeding operations and cattle feeding operations can carry the deadly MRSA, which everybody has been talking about lately. This is an antibacterial resistant strain of infectious disease in humans and animals. Pig fecal matter can carry MRSA into the wind and into the water and deposit it into streams and water tables. And the pathogens can actually carry in the wind and be carried far downwind and deposited onto fields, crops, into lakes, and over areas, including Great Falls, mind you, where people are breathing this in. Now, the report also got into detailing how over in Europe they have found, especially in areas like Denmark, 80% of the pig farmers tested had MRSA colonized in their nasal passages. Now, this is a deadly disease. If you, for example, cut yourself and then wipe your nose on your cut, you can now start getting an infectious disease in which there's no antibiotics that will take care of it.
Right.
And over in Europe, they said that we've been feeding antibiotics since the mid-1970s. It always goes back to this huge launch of where these mutilations were happening. Back in the mid-1970s, when we started, the corporations took over the pig farming and cattle farming operations here in America and started producing cattle and pig farms in mass, big pig factories. They started shooting them up with these antibiotics. Now, after a while, 80% of all antibiotics move through an animal and are deposited in their fecal matter. So what happens is our resistance to these pathogens becomes less and less, and we start becoming more and more sick. Over in Europe, the World Health Organization has actually started a movement to ban all use of antibiotics in meat, in pig farming and cattle feeding operations, and several European countries, including Canada, have noticed a correlation between MRSA and cattle feeding operations personnel and their families and pets. Now,
that's frightening, John.
Oh, it's terribly frightening, and especially when the World Health Organization points out to the United States and says the United States refuses to test their retail meat for MRSA. And they found over in Europe that MRSA is in 15% of the retail meat on the store shelves.
Jeez.
Now, I am under the impression that somebody has been surgically testing these cows, especially along these areas where pathogens may have drifted in the wind and deposited on their fields or in their drinking water supplies, to see what the effects of the pathogens have been on the cattle. Thank God they're not testing humans the same way.
Absolutely.
But they are certainly leaving these animals behind in the field for us to find. I've made the point time and time again, if it was anybody that was trying to keep it a secret, they would just they would incinerate the bodies, the carcasses, or they'd dump them up in the mountains where they would disappear forever, but they're actually laying them out in display for us to find them. We have to wonder who is trying to tell us something. They're trying to tell us something. Could it be that the contamination of the water table and our food supplies here in the United States could affect us all over the country, including all over the world, because we sell meat and we sell stock genetics and semen all around the world for livestock heads? Could it be that somebody's trying to point out to us a biological disaster on our horizon, that if we look carefully enough and force enough political comment on the subject, we could perhaps get these operations under more tight control to where they would dispose of these pig waste and animal waste properly instead of irrigating their fields with them and spreading them to the wind?
This could very well be. The question is, who's trying to let us know? And do you think this is extraterrestrial assistance or something else?
Well, I think it could possibly be extraterrestrial assistance, but more so, I'm thinking that it might be interterrestrial. In other words, other underground civilizations of human and non-human entities, that their environment is affected by our environment. If we poison the water table above ground, that might be feeding their environment underground as well. So they have something at stake also. So it could be either one of these groups. To me, I'm not so much concerned on which group it is, to tell you the truth. My main concern at this point is saying, oh my God, what if this is really the case? What if they're really trying to say, listen, look at the signs we've laid down for you and start doing your own studies, because if you attend to it now, you may be avoiding a disaster in the future.
That's a good point. Good point. Did you take any samples?
Oh, yeah.
And with what you've done, were you concerned about your own health?
Well, let's put it this way. I thought twice about keeping those samples in the fridge.
Yeah, exactly. I don't blame you.
I now realize, and I've spoken to the sheriff about it, that when these cattle mutilation mutilations are approached, that definite care should be taken, because if there's a pathogenic contamination of the carcass or of the soils around it, then it's very dangerous for anybody to be handling dead animals. I have a chart actually on the site now through those links I told you about that actually graphically displays how fecal waste can poison the community. And it's actually turning out that there are so many routes at which it gets through and into the community that it's actually very, very frightening. The handling dead animal carcasses is just one part of it. The research has led to a point of which I'm starting to get a little bit more politically motivated, because I discovered that the EPA, despite its own reports and despite the reports coming from scientific communities all around the world about the dangers of disposing of pig waste and cattle waste in irrigation waters and into the air for fertilizers and such, that the EPA is being pressured by animal feeding operations to allow them to put large amounts of fecal waste into the air through misting processes and through irrigations without actually notifying the government of their intent or their processes of doing so. They want to become completely exempt from any kind of environmental laws when it comes to disposing of fecal waste in that manner. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable that they would do such a thing, especially with the scientific information coming across. If you go to my website, I have a link there where you can go to a government, a government website where you can actually list and put in a petition to stop the EPA from allowing that law or that action to be passed. It's imperative that everybody does that.
I mean, John, they just don't care. I mean, they just do it anyway.
They don't care, but they only care, and they will start caring as soon as we start flooding their phones and start flooding their offices with physical mail. Email, I'm not sure it matters anymore. You know, those big mail bags really had punch, you know, in the old days when they had to carry 20 bags of mail. You know, that was seen throughout the offices. People were always like, oh, my God, what's going on that deserved all that? Nowadays, an email, I don't know if it gets registered as much. Certainly phone calls do, and I believe everybody should voice their opinion about it.
Well, absolutely. John, we're going to continue our dialogue. Next half hour, I want to talk with you about the hollow earth. You've done some work there, and I can't let you get away with
that.
that.
Hey, we do have a new double mutilation case that I think you'd be interested in hearing. So let's talk about that.
Now, whereabouts will that be?
That was in Depuyer in 2007, and the case is so interesting. As a matter of physical evidence was actually left behind on the scene, and it may be connected in some ways to the Delphi case of 1971, which is one of the most important and best-standing UFO sighting and landing events in history.
Hey, by the way, with Lizard Man, did anybody report lights or craft or anything like that?
In the mutilation areas?
No, with Lizard Man.
They did, although it wasn't usually associated with the times when they saw them. The lights have been seen over Skateboard Swamp. They might be swamp gas as well, because we know that does occur, but there have been very rapid moving lights in the skies over there that make sharp angled turns. So just as we're interested what might be down there, either something's down there as well or something else is interested like we are.
I think Liston had the greatest line of the week when he said he had to be careful they didn't try to make him look like Barney from Andy Griffith's show.
One bullet Barney.
I could just see that. He's a great guy. How old is he now?
I'm not sure of Liston's age. I didn't want to ask him, but he's been having health problems, and it's taken a lot out of him. And of course, every move is an effort now.
Yeah, I didn't want to keep him up too late.
Yeah, we didn't want to keep him up, and it was absolutely a fantastic opportunity to have him on board.
Absolutely.
One day when we finally do find out the reality of this subject matter, it's going to be historic that you actually had him on the air.
All right, John, we're going to talk about the double mutilations, and then we'll get into the hollow earth theory next on Coast to Coast AM. I'm George Norrie. Next hour, we'll open up the phone lines with our special guest, John Rhodes. We've got more to talk with him about. Hollow Earth, more on cattle mutilations when we come right back. And welcome to Coast. John Rhodes, let's talk about this double mutilation story, then we'll get on to the Hollow Earth.
George.
Yes, sir.
Well, I think your listeners would be very interested in this story, as it does actually connect to the first part of what we were talking about with the stream beds and the hog farming operations. And it also presents us with a situation in which actually there was anomalous evidence left behind, trace evidence, in which is being investigated right now. At my site, on the very bottom, at the front page of my site at Reptilians.com, on the very bottom of it, there's the link saying 2007 cattle mutilations. If you go there, there's some images I'd like to direct the listeners to. And for those people who can't see them, I'll tell you what you're seeing. Back in 2007, or 2006, I should start off, when I was working with Sheriff Kuka up here, I had mentioned to him that we should keep an eye out for mutilations to occur almost a year to the day in 2007. And he asked me why, and I said, well, it's just a matter of a calendar thing. If somebody's testing animals, usually they like to do the same test at the same time of the year, so other environmental factors are kind of negated. And sure enough, I was actually talking to John Peterson, wondering if he had received the check from the eBay sale of the cow skull that was sold on eBay for him. And during that conversation, he brought it to my attention about two more mutilations that occurred in an area just south of Valier that's connected through DePuyer Creek, and it's called DePuyer. And I got in touch with a rancher out there, and he told me, invited me out to the ranch, and when I got there, he told me that he and a friend of his who was pasturing his calf out on his property had found these cows